You're listening to the Cash Flow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner, your source for investing made easy. Here's Andy Tanner.
Welcome to the Cash Flow Academy show. My name is Andy Tanner. I'm your host. This is where investing is made simple. And today we're going to be speaking with, this is a treat. We have Warren Valdmanis today, and he's from Bain, and we'll give a little bit more of his background. But his book, available on Amazon, is Accountable: The Rise of Citizen Capitalism. So we'll be speaking a little bit about both the big picture of where corporate America is, but also give you some thoughts as an individual as you seek your entrepreneurial efforts. Just a little background on Warren. He leads a social impact fund that invests in the American workforce, previously managing director at Bain Capital Social Impact Fund. And before that, he invested with Bain Capital's private equity team for about 10 years. He's from Canada, grew up in Canada, but he's worked all over the world: Australia, Chile, France, Hong Kong, Japan, South Africa, and the United States. Studied his undergrad at Dartmouth, and then earned his MBA at Harvard Business School, which is always intimidating for a guy like me because I'm not the smartest guy. I get to talk to a lot of smart guys. And so with that introduction, Warren Valdmanis, thank you so much for being on the Cash Flow Academy podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. It's my pleasure.
This is going to be an interesting conversation in two levels. There's kind of a macro level, a global level, a political level of where people have different opinions of big business. And then there's also the ideas that I hope to stir in the individual entrepreneur's heart, because I think there can be some great lessons that we learn individually as well as collectively. So first of all, Warren, I gave a little bit of your background. If you'd like to add to that, and maybe talk about your experience that made you feel that you wanted to write Accountable: The Rise of Citizen Capitalism. What was in your history and in your life's experience that made you say, you know what, I'm going to write on this and share what I know with the world?
Absolutely, Andy. Well, my history is, I started my career as a consultant and swiftly became a private equity investor. And what private equity investors do is, we buy companies and we seek to improve them and then sell them and make money that way. And it was a model that I really liked because so you have time to execute longer-term plans. And I think you can be more thoughtful about making investments when you have a longer time horizon. So I really enjoyed that. But it was only a few years ago that I got a chance to join Bain Capital's Double Impact Group, which was an impact investing startup. My partner in that effort was Governor Deval Patrick, who had been a popular two-term governor of Massachusetts.
Bain's an interesting company. I don't know that it's unique, but in a lot of ways it is. First of all, they only bring on the best of the best. I mean, almost everyone I've ever met that's been associated with Bain I don't know if Meg Whitman is a Harvard grad, but I know Mitt Romney's a Harvard grad and you're a Harvard grad. I mean, they really go for the brightest and best, and this idea of proving companies is a cool idea. So when it comes to accountable, and we talk about social, is there such a word as social capitalism? I know my friends Josh and Lisa Lannon think so. What do you see as the problem with capitalism? I mean, it's difficult because it is going to create wealth disparity. It just is. People are going to fight to lower costs and fight to get market share. In my opinion, that's a good thing. But there is going to be a concentration of wealth in certain pockets. So tell me a little bit about how you feel about wealth disparity, perhaps, and where capitalism is a good thing and where capitalism can improve.
Well, listen, Andy, I'm very much a capitalist myself, to be clear. I mean, and the capitalist, the report card, the 250-year report card for capitalism is very good indeed. During the 3,000 years prior to 1750, economic growth per person was effectively zero.
Yeah.
Therefore, no improvement in standard of living. Since 1750, the world's economic output per person has skyrocketed by more than 37 times. So when you think of all of the things that we enjoy today, in terms of abundant food, endless entertainment options, leisure time, life expectancy, these things didn't happen by accident. They happened by capitalism. And remember, just since 1990, we in the last 30 years alone, we've lifted over 1 billion people out of poverty. So capitalism is an incredibly powerful institution, and I think one of the best institutions that humankind's ever invented. However, the last 40 years of capitalism as practiced in America have been tough. And let me give you an example, a stat that I found shocking. Today, the difference in life expectancy between adjacent rich and poor neighborhoods in the city where I used to live, in Boston, is 33 years. Now, that is a shocking statistic. And a lot of that has to do with not just wealth disparity. I mean, there's always going to be some amount of wealth disparity, as you said, but extreme wealth and income disparity. Yeah. And not just that, but only 1 in 3 Americans today believe that their children will be better off than their parents. That is a new thing in America. So something is going wrong.
I think this is an important thing not to move off of too quickly when we talk about standard of living. We might look at people we call the 1% perhaps, or even the 1/10 of 1%. We see a high concentration of money in their bank account, in their asset column. And maybe, not maybe, but definitely there's other people who don't have that same balance sheet they do. But I've got to tell you, I look at a guy like Steve Jobs, and if you that's 35 million iPads that guy had to build and give to other people. And I look at my son and the gateway to the universe he was given with that little iPad. And you mentioned entertainment, education, knowledge, communication, better medicine. That our standard of living, while capitalism has its imperfections, our standard of living, as you say, over the past 300 years is just fantastic. And this has been, I don't know that it was America that really started. I mean, you have Adam Smith and all those guys, but the world really has, by competition, we have better medicine at lower prices, considering what we get in return. So I'm very much a capitalist as well. But I also recognize, as you said, over the past 4 decades, there is a big wealth disparity. Is there something wrong with that? Is it just because we don't like these guys having this excess and these yachts? Are they all evil people? I think there's some that do good in the world. But why is wealth disparity not only a problem for the poor, but it's a problem for the middle class, and it's actually a problem for the rich?
Yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely is a problem. The way you just described it, it's a problem for everybody. And I think one of the issues is that from the World War II period through the early 1970s, wages for the average worker, productivity, basically moved in lockstep. Mm-hmm. Since 1973, wages have been more or less stagnant. Productivity has gone up by 250%. So there's been a disconnect out there in terms of how the gains of increasing prosperity are being shared. So there's an equity issue that I think many people are increasingly tuning into. But it's not just an equity issue. It's also an efficiency issue. Mm-hmm. Growth from World War II to the early 70s, it was around 4% per year on average. It's been 0 to 3% in the last decade, for example.
So, I look at that inequality, and there's certainly an element of greed that is part of the worst part of our human nature. I think we have both. We have the capacity for empathy, the capacity for compassion, to think of another's state and put ourselves in his shoes. But also, as human beings, we have a tremendous capacity of selfishness and survival of the fittest. And, just try to get some toilet paper during a pandemic, and you'll see how we go from social to primal, pretty quickly. We can do that. But I'll tell you, corporate greed is an interesting thing. I've written a little bit on greed, not to the extent other people have, and I'm not that smart. But to me, greed is a feeling someone has. It's an emotion someone has. And greed can be, a poor person can feel greed. A rich person can feel greed. There's people on welfare that actually want something for nothing, and there's people that are very rich that want it all. And so if I'm talking to an entrepreneur and you've had experience in building companies, when you talk to an entrepreneur, how do we deal with those emotions of greed, and how do we find the beauty and the satisfaction that goes beyond a bottom line, beyond net earnings, and say, hey, we just did some good in the world?
I actually think most people and business people are really good people and do care about others.
Yeah.
But I think we've lost the knack of investing, particularly investing in workers, but we've lost the knack of exploring the intersection of the social and the commercial. And I think that, listen, no one minds company, builds great products for its customers, treats its workers really well, is sensitive to the concerns of its communities. If that company does well and makes money for shareholders, that's a great thing. That's the American way. Mm-hmm. But the issue is when companies take shortcuts. And I think most Americans have great morals. I think this is much more about enlightened self-interest and knowing how to think long-term. And when you think long-term, you tend to do better by the stakeholders around you. I'll give you a great example.
Yeah.
I'm an impact investor. Most impact investors don't think that there could even be such a thing as a socially responsible strip mine. The first chapter of our book, that's what we start with.
Boy, I'll tell you that's a great hook right there, because that's a beautiful example. You think strip mine, you're thinking, okay, this is absolutely about ruining the environment and getting the gold. So I'm excited to hear this. This is awesome.
Yeah, and so the interesting thing about this strip mine, it's in the middle of Virginia. It's a family business that's been handed down from generation to generation. And this is an owner that thinks intergenerationally. He's thinking about what his grandchildren are going to do with this business. And he's deeply embedded in his community. And so, for example, when he shuts down a site, he restores that site to a state of basically natural habitat, just like it was before he mined it. And the reason he does that is not only because he's a person, but also because he cares about it. He's deeply embedded there. His employees often retire at 65, not 65 years old, but 65 years of service, because this is their family. They think of this as something that is part of their identity. This company, and that comes from thinking long term. That comes from thinking intergenerationally. And the issue I think that we have in our economy is many business executives and many of the boards that hire them and evaluate them think in terms of quarter to quarter as opposed to even years. And so I think that's a big part of the issue here.
I have on my artwork in my office is strange. I don't have pictures or photos. I have quotes and different artwork that usually has to do with a person or a concept or a principle. And one of the things I have is this from Charlie Munger. And he said this. He said, if all you succeed in doing in life is getting rich by buying little pieces of paper, it's a failed life. Life is more than being shrewd in wealth accumulation. And someone's going to say, well, Munger, how does he say something like that? He's done, he's made a lot of money by buying little pieces of paper. But as I've studied those guys, Warren and Munger, they really are proud of their businesses. When you go to the Berkshire Hathaway, annual shareholder meeting in Omaha, which COVID denied it this year, but they really do care about the quality of their businesses and the service they give. And I would just say to anyone listening, and this is a great reason to go to Amazon.com and add to your library. Each week each podcast, we try to find a book and an author that has a message that can help you personally. And so when you go to Amazon.com and you buy Accountable, The Rise of Citizen Capitalism, it's going to give you food for thought. It's going to give you things to think about in your own entrepreneurial efforts that can place mission first. And that's when a business is beautiful, because when you find something you're passionate about, but something that is truly serving people in exchange for the dollars you earn, that's a more long-term solid. I love the strip mine idea because it's a legacy idea. It's a family business. It's wonderful stuff. Capitalism is never going to be perfect, but how do we instill that idea in a world where I was I'm an overgrown Boy Scout, Warren. I was in the Boy Scouts, and we had this idea that when you go to a campground, same as the strip mine, you leave it better than you found it. That's the Boy Scout way. And do a good turn daily is their slogan, and be prepared is the motto. How do we instill that, or not even instill, but I guess it's through books like yours. How do we inspire and put breath into people to where their entrepreneurial efforts are socially responsible? How does that happen? How do we improve upon where we are now?
Well, I think, Andy, you have to appeal to people's hearts and also their heads. And you were saying earlier that you liked quotes. You like to surround yourself with quotes from interesting folks. My favorite quote is from Teddy Roosevelt when he said, "Far and away the best prize that life has to offer is the chance to work hard at work worth doing."
Oh, that's beautiful.
And that to me is a really important lesson, especially for entrepreneurs. Find something that where there's a purpose. I think what Munger was saying was not so much about whether the pieces of paper themselves. What he was really saying is do things with purpose, do things intentionally, and you'll have a lot more energy at the beginning of each day, and you'll have a lot more to show for it at the end of each day. And so I'd say my advice to entrepreneurs is start with purpose, and then I'd say and that's the hard part. The head part is it's really important to realize that most companies start with strategy. But the real capstone, the real top of the pyramid of any business should be its purpose. It should be the clarity of its mission. And strategy is what comes next. Strategy is how you get that done. And then, operations and tactics sit underneath that. And I think a lot of folks skip that first step. And if you skip that first step, I think you're going to have a lot harder time being successful in any company.
I mean, I would imagine at Bain, I would love to be a fly on the wall. I probably wouldn't understand half of what was said, but I'd love to be a fly on the wall because Bain is going to go in and they're going to buy a company. And how do you improve that? Well, you're going to do that on metrics. So I understand basic fundamental analysis pretty well. I understand a lot of those, it's important to have good EBITDA and all that type of stuff. But what are the metrics that companies could find and use in terms of social value and in terms of investment in employee and, are you doing some good in the world? What are the service metrics related to what we're talking about?
The work I'm doing right now is on creating good jobs. And the premise of that is that creating good jobs is a lost art, but it's that if done properly and with discipline, can make businesses way more valuable. In the American economy today, almost half of workers in America say that they're not connected to their work. They don't understand the purpose of it. 13% are actively disengaged, which means they actively work against the interests of the companies that they work at.
Wow.
So, disengaged workers, we call it the silent killer of companies. And so the premise of the work I'm doing now is, what if we turn that around and we said, what if we invested in workers in new ways? Not just how we pay them and how we schedule them, of course those things are important, but also how we train them and how we motivate them around a common purpose. And the view is if you do those things effectively, you can create enormous value for the workers and for the companies that they work at. And so it's my view that America's lost the ability to do that effectively, yes. And we're going to try to help find that ability again.
Well, I would agree with that 100%. I've heard a job defined as being somewhere you don't want to be, doing something you don't want to do with people you don't want to do it with in order to get a paycheck, and that's it. And when people can find a calling, that's when things go. I love companies that are spiritual, not in terms of religious spirit, but at team spirit. When I played basketball in college, I felt we had that between these guys. There was even if you were a role player and weren't the leading scorer, you felt you had a purpose, you felt you were contributing, and you felt fulfillment beyond, just a reward or signing an autograph for a little kid or something. And that's a huge challenge, though. I mean, because that is definitely not what people think of, when they think of Wall Street. When I think of Wall Street, I think of guys sometimes in the top floor of a room that say, okay, 3 letters, AUM, assets under management. That's what we're after. Let's go get it. And, that greed thing. So this is a great discussion to have. And on a macro level, we want to change it. But let's talk to the person listening who has been thinking about being an entrepreneur. One of the opportunities that COVID-19 brings, in my opinion, is the chance to innovate and the chance to solve problems. I've seen so many entrepreneurs that decide to take the plunge because they had to. Maybe they lost a job or their business was shut down. So they innovate and they say, hey, how can I contribute and solve problems? Could you speak to a moment, to the individual, someone who is, they're not Home Depot and they're not big. They're going to start a little venture. Talk to them a little bit about what advice or counsel you would give the budding entrepreneur in terms of the social responsibility of their ventures to profit.
The best advice that I can offer is start with the perspective of the problem you're trying to solve rather than how you're going to make money. As you build your team, think about the people you want to surround yourself with from their perspective also. In other words, too often entrepreneurs sit there and they say, oh, gosh, this would be a great way to make money. I could create this and I could sell it for more, and that's a great way to make money. If you don't have clarity of what it is that you're offering to those you want to surround yourself with and the people that you employ, I think too often people take shortcuts around that stuff. And I would say that if I've learned anything from impact investing, it's the power of looking at your business through the lens of your stakeholders.
What a wonderful feeling. I think many people who have the pressures of difficult financial situations, single moms, dads working 2 jobs maybe, and they struggle and they feel pain that many people in the 1% really don't relate to. It's a very grassroots thing. And so they dream of winning the lottery and how nice that would be to solve their problem. And there's a real advantage, I think, and Warren, I have to agree with you 100%, that if a person can somehow say, I really wouldn't want to win the lottery. I wouldn't want something for nothing. I want to contribute, and I want to say, hey, here was a problem, and I was part of the solution and on my way. I had a friend of mine who had a hard growing up in his childhood. He got kicked out of school for fighting, and he got work at a bar, at a club, and became a bouncer and an alcoholic, and his whole life went down the tubes. And then he gets in rehab, and he emerges from rehab saying, I can't go back to the bar. I want to change my life. I want to stay sober. He says, I want to help other people get sober. And with no high school degree, with no money, with nothing, somehow, with this passion of wanting to help people get sober, he was able to raise capital. And he has one of the most successful businesses I know that helps first responders get over their PTSD. And he has he has a 500-acre ranch now in Texas where the people can come and get help. And I think of the fertility doctor that brought me my son and the satisfaction he must have in giving people the blessing of creating life. So what your message is so important to preserve capitalism so we can do better in the next 40 years than we have in the last 40 years. You've been so gracious with your time. Final thoughts before it's time to close.
Well, I just say, Andy, that this talk about purpose, it's purpose that gets you through the hard times. When you go off and you start a business, and I have some experience with this, when you hit a roadblock, a lot of times there's a temptation to stop going. Mm-hmm. But when you have purpose at the center of your, that's at the center of your motivation, you can overcome lots more things. I said earlier, it gets you up in the morning, but it also gets you gets you up the hill. And so I'm not surprised to hear that your friend, who was so motivated by what he was doing, I'm not surprised to hear that he was successful, because truly perseverance in the face of obstacles has got to be one of the chief things that makes an entrepreneur successful, and perseverance is fueled by purpose.
The word inspiration comes from putting spirit in, the breath of life. I recommend Accountable, The Rise of Citizen Capitalism. Go to Amazon.com and pick that up, because what that will do as you read it is you'll have food for thought of what your purpose is, what you want to achieve, and how you want to serve others. And I will just give you my opinion that as you ponder about those things, determinations will arise in your heart, passion will arise, and certainly you'll have that fuel to start your own venture and make the ventures you're in better. Warren, thank you so much for your time. I hope you'll join us again sometime. And just a wonderful conversation on service, on purpose, beyond the dollar. And I just, again, go to Amazon.com, check out Accountable, The Rise of Citizen Capitalism. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Andy.
You've been listening to the Cashflow Academy podcast. I'm your host, Andy Tanner, where we make investing simple. Hope you enjoyed our conversation with Warren Valdmanis today, who wrote the book Accountable, The Rise of Citizen Capitalism. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Cashflow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner. For more information on investing made easy, go to thecashflowacademy.com.